Let me first take a matter where I very much changed my mind. And in fact, it's the major area where, as a sociologist, I changed my mind. And that is the question of the relationship of religion to modernity. When I started out my work in sociology of religion, almost everyone in the field believed in what generally was called secularization theory, which, when you take apart some of the pretentious verbiage of sociologists, really is a very simple thesis. It's a thesis that modernity leads to a decline of religion. The more modernity, the less religion. And almost everyone thought that at the time. This was, when did I start? Well, in the 60s, when I started writing things and doing things beyond being a student. It was not completely crazy. There were some reasons for saying this. If I had more time, I would talk about where we were right, where we were wrong. But and my first publications were very much on religion, were very much based on that assumption, which I didn't argue, which I assumed as being one of the common understandings of the field. I changed my mind not because of any religious or philosophical changes on my own, but simply because I concluded that the evidence simply did not support this thesis. And I was not the only one. Almost everyone in the field came to the same conclusion, many of them about the same time, and there are reasons why this happened, particularly very strongly in the 70s. Contrary to that theory, to describe the modern world, the contemporary world, as being highly secularized is a very difficult feat indeed. There are a couple of social scientists who hold on to that theory, which in a way I admire. I admire people who go against majority opinion. In fact, I somehow admire people whose views are maintained in the face of empirical evidence. There's something heroic about this kind of chutzpah. But most people in the area would agree secularization theory has become untenable. And if we look, now the empirical situation is not simple, it's complicated, and I will just talk about it very briefly. If you look at the contemporary world, to describe it as secular is impossible. The real situation is that most of the world is as religious as it ever was. You have enormous explosions of religion in the world. I would say the two major ones, one is very well known, the other one still not quite as well known, and I will talk about it in a moment. One is the enormous upsurge of Islam, which nobody predicted, and has become very well known, partly for obvious reasons on the world scene. And the other is the meteoric rise of Pentecostalism, which I will talk about in a moment. These are the two big explosions, one could call them, of religious passion in the world. There are some others. In fact, you can say every major religious tradition has been going through a period of resurgence in the last 30, 40 years or so. Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, you name it. Anything but secularization. Now, there are two exceptions to this generalization about the religiosity of the contemporary world. One is geographical, and the other is sociological. Geographically, the one important area of the world where you can really say secularization has gone on in a very massive way is Europe. And some outliers of Europe, like Australia, Quebec, very interesting case. But in terms of major areas in the world, Europe is very secularized compared to any other part of the world, and very much so in comparison to the United States. I won't say North America, because already Canada, even English-speaking Canada, is a little different. But the difference between the United States and Europe is very significant theoretically in terms of the demise of secularization theory. Because if modernity necessarily leads to a decline of religion, how do you explain the United States? Say it's the exception to the rule, but it's a pretty big exception that really puts the theory into question. And it's very difficult to argue that, say, the Netherlands are more modern than the United States. It simply doesn't hold. And yet there is a vibrant religious population in the United States.